Hey guys, and welcome back to another episode of Minecraft. And I am here with Dewey and Luminary Xion, and we are going to be discussing Minecraft. Now, for those of you who are not familiar with this giant object right before me, like I wasn't when I first logged on, this is what they called a nuclear reactor. Is that right, Dewey?
Yep, that's a reactor from the mod known as Big Reactors.
And what exactly did it take to build this? Like, what material was hard to find?
None of it. The casing is made out of yellowite and coal, and yeah, basically the whole of it is made out of yellorium and coal. So various pieces take various bits. And there's a little bit of some glass in there. There's some bits of computer to control things. So some gold, redstone, nothing too crazy or exotic, very common materials, very easy to find.
Now, what exactly is this doing? I mean, it's creating power, obviously, but what is that for?
And so that power will go down through the middle section. We have it covered with some cable facade, so you can't actually see the cable. And it goes underground underneath this whole area that we have designed. What it's doing, if we come in this blue door here, is powering these machines. So in between the little glowy bit on the left, there are two machines that look kind of gray. One is a sag mill on the left that grinds up all of our ores, grinds up some of our materials into other products that we need to build other things. On the right is an alloy smelter that does other things, like, for example, makes the power cables that are necessary for expansion and connecting of bits. Right below you, you'll actually see one of those power cables. And in order to make that, there's pieces that have to go into the alloy smelter, and then it spits out some of that cable there.
That's very cool. So basically, it's taking over the job of the coal. You don't have to use that anymore, right?
Sort of, yeah. So it's taking over the energy generation of coal from a generator, and it's also giving us way more power output than we could ever possibly produce with just a simple coal generator.
Now, you have water in there to cool it. What happens if you don't cool it enough? Does this actually explode?
No. So if you right-click on the little red part here at the front, you'll see that there's an interface, and this is the reactor control panel. It's very straightforward. Right now the reactor is offline, as indicated by the status offline at the bottom. So the reactor is sitting at a nice idle 20 degrees Celsius. There's nothing happening here. On the far right hand side, the little icon that looks like a battery, that tells us our current power level. And if you hover your mouse over it, it'll tell you that right now we have a buffer that's being slowly depleted. We're at about 77% right now. When this hits zero, obviously then there's no more power. The whole point of having the reactor online, if I turn it on right now, you'll start to see that the temperature starts to increase dramatically on the top left-hand corner. The power generation is the second option there on the left-hand side, and it tells you how much is being generated per tick. In this case, we're making about 3,300, and it kicked offline because the computer there. But we're making about 3,300 redstone flux per tick, and redstone flux is the measurement of power in this particular mod pack. So just like we would have gigawatts in the real world, this is what we're measuring here. Every machine takes a certain amount of power. You could have 100 RF per tick, you could have 1,000, you could have 10,000. It depends on the machine and what it's doing. So obviously the more power you're making per tick, the more that you can expand off of the one reactor up to a certain degree. The part right below is our fuel consumption. Right now it's zero again because the reactor is off. But the hotter the reactor gets, the top part, the faster we consume our fuel. So there is a trade-off. Yes, heat is good, it burns fast, it makes a lot of power, but it burns fast. And at the very bottom, you'll start to see something called field reactivity. It looks like a little nuclear icon, and right now we're at about 360 to 69%, somewhere in there. Those two pieces in combination at the bottom, that tells us how efficient we're being with our fuel. If we're burning really hot, but we have a very heavily irradiated core, then it's more efficient than if we had a low irradiated core, like just a single fuel rod down the middle.
And the 365, is that about average for most users, or have you gotten a lot higher than that?
I believe the highest I've ever seen is about 400 or 450, I can't remember. I haven't seen any higher than that though. And the reason being is because the reactor design is very, very critical in measuring the efficiency. So if you step back and you look on the side, you can see that we have 5 fuel rods and there's gaps in between each piece. If I were to fill those gaps with different materials, it would actually start transferring the heat a little faster away from the rods and towards the casing. That would reduce my fuel burnup rate, and it would also improve my efficiency. Different materials are better than others at the efficiency. Water is one of the worst. Air is one of the worst as well, which I currently have. Then we go into things like solid diamond blocks. We get into things like something called gelid cryothium, which is extremely cold. It is so cold that if you put it down right where we're standing, we would actually start taking damage, and it would slow us down considerably.
And where do you get that from? Is that just made, or can you find that in certain areas with certain mod packs?
Yeah, that stuff is made. So you'll find in snow biomes, snowmen that will drop some cryothium, they'll drop blizz rods, which is very similar to the nether, the blaze, which drops a blaze rod, but this one is a blizz or blizzard rod, and then that gets crushed up into this freezing cold material that we can use for cooling. But then, of course, the trade-off is if we go too cold, then we slow down the power generation. So it's finding that happy medium between the two. You'll notice I have a computer from Computercraft plugged into the side here, and what that's doing, it's a program somebody has written. It's called Easy Nuke, and it's measuring how much fuel I have. It's measuring how much power I'm putting out and how much is in my buffer, which is that big red bar on the right-hand side. When that buffer hits about 25% or so, and I can configure that if I will, or if I want to, I mean, then it'll kick in and it'll say, oh, go online because your power is low. Then it'll kick off. So it's really on demand. I don't have to touch this at this point.
It's very, very cool. I like the whole setup. Now, did you have to use glass down here on the bottom, or did you just do that for aesthetics?
It is purely for aesthetics at the bottom.
Oh, okay, so this can look a whole slew of different ways then. It doesn't have to look exactly like this.
That's correct. Everything for the reactor itself is the actual gray casing that has kind of the nuts and bolts and that industrial look.
Now, are you going to make a better reactor than this in the future? Because you were saying that this is actually one of the uglier ones, one of the easier ones to make.
That's correct. So this is something called actively cooled, or pardon me, passively cooled. Means there's no cooling going on. There's nothing really happening. It's just there. And what'll happen later is one of these pieces of glass will actually be replaced by a port for a turbine. We'll be heating up water into steam. The steam will be pumped out of the reactor to a turbine. The turbine will spin. It'll generate power. The steam will condense. It'll go back into the reactor to be reheated again, and it'll be a complete cycle. Very similar to nuclear reactors in the real world today.
And the nuclear reactor, is that the only kind of power source that you can make in here, or are there other types, like you just said, wind generated or steam generated?
There's quite a few. We can use solar power. We can use geothermal. We can use lava, which will then go into what's called a magmatic dynamo, and it'll power itself that way. We can use coal plus water, which will give us a steam-powered dynamo that'll do power as well. There's quite a few options for power generation. I would say there's, I think, 20 in total across all the various mod packs that I know of.
And out of all of them, which one's the most powerful, would you say?
It depends what you're doing. If you're looking for raw power generation, well, then the next question is, what kind of power are you talking about? If you're talking about strictly electricity or measured in what is called RF per tick, then big reactors by far, because it's so modular. You can expand things. You can go crazy big, crazy tall, crazy wide, and you can just amp it up to a crazy degree, which really shouldn't even work in the real world, but of course this is Minecraft. If you're looking strictly for electricity as defined by the real world, then you're looking at something called Reactor Craft, which will give you a fusion reactor that is very complicated to build, extremely difficult, very, very finicky, looks absolutely amazing. It's very reminiscent of the warp core from the USS Enterprise in The Next Generation.
Nice.
Very much with the pulsing of the plasma, all that kind of stuff. There's Greg Tech, also confusing and complicated and very difficult to do, but once online also looks ridiculously amazing. And I believe that makes a power unit known as EU. The fun part, you cannot convert RF to EU and back again. The same goes for MJ. You can't just convert one power type to another. It's very difficult to do, and there's a lot of loss involved. So you have to really figure out what are you doing, why are you doing it, what's your end goal, and how are you going to power it, and go from there.
Okay, well, guys, we're going to go ahead and end the episode here. I hope you enjoyed the episode. If you did, make sure you hit that like button, subscribe. Definitely helps grow our channel. We greatly appreciate it. If you guys want to say something before we head out.
Just remember to like, link, and subscribe.
Mata ne. Bye bye.
We'll catch you next time, guys.